Do you ever feel like a solitary creature living in a social world? We are building an online community that fosters virtual friendships. Hello, and welcome to Social Leopards. I'm Beth.
Hi, I'm Bea.
And we are here to collect and share stories and information in the hopes of finding positive and meaningful ways forward. It is our goal to navigate this jungle called life.
Who knows? Maybe a leopard can change its spots.
Hello, and welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to talk about social anxiety. So if you are a social leopard trying to make it in a social world as a not-so-social person, anxiety is sometimes one of the reasons that it makes it hard to get out there and get social. I don't think I made very much sense there, Bea.
Hi, it's Bea. How's everyone doing tonight? Yeah, social anxiety is definitely a problem that I think a lot of people are even unaware that they might have. So I think it's very difficult to understand, and I think it's difficult when you have it because you don't know how to connect with people, and then you're so nervous about social situations that you avoid them also. Yeah. Have you had experiences ever with that, Beth?
No, not myself, but I know a lot of people who do struggle with it to different varying degrees. Got a couple stories to share today anonymously.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I can't wait to hear them.
Yeah, I kind of attribute it to fight or flight. And I think that, when you get that ugly feeling in the pit of your stomach and you start feeling like, oh, I can't be here anymore. I kind of like envision that as kind of how mild social anxiety would feel.
I agree with that. Yeah, I would. Yeah.
And then there are people who simply cannot. They just literally cannot put themselves out there. And I think the root cause of that varies by person. That's, I think, one of the biggest things. I know that with COVID-19, a lot of people got used to being cooped up. And when, especially some of those formative teenagers, where they didn't get some of those social activities in high school that they normally would get. And 2 years later, they're out there and college seemed a lot harder.
Yes.
And scarier for a lot of people. I mean, I'm sure there are a million stories out there, and I hope some of you choose to share your social anxiety stories with us after this episode, because I think we could probably do like a whole season just on this.
Definitely. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
But feeling uncomfortable in social situations is not super uncommon. Most people take a just do it attitude, and it does get easier with time.
It does, but I think it has to be done under the right circumstances and done very slowly and carefully. I think I remember when I was a lot younger, when a child, and then my mother, she didn't have any good strategies to deal with difficult situations, and she was busy. And I know there were many occasions in which she pushed me into a situation which was extremely uncomfortable, and I didn't feel like I could say no because I was a kid. And, I did have a ton of anxiety and eventually learned how to deal with it, made friends, etc. But I think there are better ways of doing that. So,
right, to not push somebody to a certain limit. There is no right or wrong to this.
Great.
Want the audience to know that straight out. We're just going to share different observations and stories about different people's kind of experiences.
Yes.
And I think that we'll find that there are just as many responses to different social experiences that cause or create anxiety for someone else that, we could tell stories all day. This might be a 6-hour episode. Who knows?
True. And there are different situations that trigger different people. So we all don't get anxiety in the same situation. Mm. It's different for everyone. So
I was reading an article about this whole social anxiety situation and how it's almost an epidemic post-pandemic. It's its own epidemic. And I think one of the things that happens when you get into this whole fight or flight type of response situation where you kind of freeze up, right? And you don't know what to do. And then that panics you in and of itself because all of a sudden you realize it's almost like I didn't take a breath for the last 10 seconds or whatever it is that causes it. And they called it frontal lobe paralysis.
Mm-hmm.
Like you couldn't process. You got so caught up in the moment that you just couldn't even process your situation. And as a behavioral health person who has some professional, I mean, have you ever heard of that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's just
Yes.
amazing to me.
Also, yeah, exactly. And, being in psychology, and I've had the chance to obviously assess thousands of kids, you will see differences in cognition and ability when you see an anxious child versus not anxious child. And it could look 20 to 30 points different on a cognitive measure. So it can make a huge difference.
Yeah. I mean, I think the closest I ever come is like stage fright back in the day when I did community theater and, that first time that you were about to hit the stage for the first time during a show and all the butterflies would pop up and you were like, what am I doing?
Yes.
But then I've always been able to push past that and get around it. And then once I was out there, then it was like too late and you're in front of an audience and you're just going to do it. And then it's almost like automation kicks in. All those weeks of memorization and all of that just kind of starts kicking in. And it all sort of works out when you do that kind of activity. But wow, it can be intense for that one moment.
Yeah. And I think part of it is preparedness. I think if you don't feel prepared for a situation and you don't know how it's going to turn out, I think that causes more anxiety. I know for myself, I remember those times where I didn't feel like I was prepared. And then when I was, I had less anxiety. So there's so many different facets to it.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the coping mechanisms for people when they feel stressed out or anxious or worried about something coming up. One of the words that comes to mind is mindfulness.
Yes, that's a new buzzword.
You want to explain a little bit for those in the audience who aren't so familiar about mindfulness?
So it's just taking the moment to be aware of where you are, kind of trying to be present. Meditation is kind of correlated with mindfulness, maybe taking a breath, just slowing down, maybe thinking about doing one thing at a time. That's kind of related to mindfulness.
Okay. Another thing that I've heard are grounding techniques.
Yes.
I know, and I didn't know until my sister-in-law pointed it out one day, but sometimes when I'm thinking, and sometimes when I'm not, I have this unconscious habit, which has become a conscious habit, which I'm now trying to break, of I always seem to have my thumb and either my forefinger or my middle finger, and I'll just kind of like, I don't know, I'm showing what you can't see right now, audience, but I will just be driving sometimes and I'll have one hand on the steering wheel. Shh, don't tell that sometimes I only have one hand on the steering wheel, but
I never do that.
No, never. Nobody does. Everyone always is 10 and 2 with both hands on the steering wheel. But I just like doing a little circle, and my sister-in-law pointed that out to me, and I literally, in my lifetime, have never realized that I had done that. And now it's driving me crazy. And I'm not holding her responsible for it, but now I notice that it's happening in the oddest of moments. And I don't know if that's a grounding technique that I've created for myself subconsciously to just keep thoughts intact or what, but you can do things. It's kind of like what's the rubber band around your...
Yes. Of your hand, snapping it or just...
Snapping a rubber band against your wrist to
wake yourself up or keep yourself focused. Yeah, I've seen people do that, yeah.
So that is a grounding technique. Or, slowly tapping something. And when you're really, really nervous, you can start to even just listen to the sound of your own breathing to calm down.
Again, meditation, taking a few breaths. They had talked about a technique. It's like the 4-7 technique. So, you basically you take 4 breaths and then you count for 7 seconds and you slowly let them out. So there's still a variety of just to kind of calm yourself down so then you can refocus. So I think there's a lot of things people can do.
Right. Find the calm.
Yes.
So when you're starting to feel a little anxious or worried or just nervous, finding, there's a million internet articles out there for anything and everything,
Absolutely.
right? And YouTube videos and all the same. Yep. And how to ground yourself in the moment, be mindful, use meditative techniques. Practicing yoga can make you just a calmer, more centered person, I hear. I have tried yoga more times than I care to count, and I can never seem to stick with it. But it does work for a lot of people and makes them feel like they are more at peace.
Yes, definitely. I've heard that. Yeah, same. I don't know. I think it bores me. I think yoga does. So I don't know if that's going to work. But I think it would be great if I could get past that.
Now, I know someone who tried this kind of meditative, it was a meditative yoga, I think, if I remember correctly. But this person started to have issues with it because they had a very difficult childhood. And every time they would be alone in the moment and starting to, everything starting to clear, then, I don't know, it's just a theory, but like that past trauma would start to try to rise out from that calm.
Yes.
And so it had kind of the opposite effect on them.
Yes.
And so, of course, I got right back on the internet. And I did find that while it works for a lot of people, there is a small faction of people where it will actually, if you don't have someone to help you through that, it can actually stir up a lot of extra emotion. I know sometimes sitting quietly, trying to just rest or relax, and all of a sudden my mind will start to wander. And sometimes it does lean towards worry or anxiety about a certain situation. I don't have social anxiety, but I do have worries and, anxiousness and nervousness about situations.
I think everyone does. I think that's a normal response. But back to what you were saying about sometimes meditation or yoga triggering other things that we're trying to suppress. I think this is why when people have a lot of trauma in their lives, one of the ways they deal with it is running away, being constantly active and kind of running away from themselves. So it makes sense to me that if you had a moment of calm, that those thoughts would start coming back.
Right. So the always being busy and always having something to do is another way to cope with that, to not deal with the actual underlying reasons.
Correct.
So back to social anxiety. Wanted to talk about a couple of ways to deflect or to feel more comfortable in social situations when you're in them. Like, I don't know, an after work event where you're like not super comfortable with your coworkers, especially if you're like in a hybrid or a usually remote situation, and all of a sudden you're like stuck going to this event of some sort. Maybe it's a conference, maybe it's a seminar, maybe it's like once a year, it's an all-employee meeting and it's mandatory, and you're just not used to being in that situation. Let's brainstorm some ideas for deflecting that discomfort. The big one that comes to my mind is when I'm around people, I know when I was younger, I always wanted to, be the talker. And in my later, as I mature a little bit, I'm not old, but I'm more mature and I've had some life experiences. I like to listen a little bit more than I like to talk most of the time. And I might get excited about something and then have something to offer, and I don't have a problem just pitching in. But for people who aren't comfortable, or sometimes there's a little fear that somebody's going to ask a question that puts them in an uncomfortable situation, right?
Yeah.
So deflecting a question with another question is always a really good coping mechanism, because 9 times out of 10, when somebody asks a question, they're hoping that you're going to ask that question about them. Think about it. So if somebody says, so let's say I'm someone who just doesn't really feel like they have a life. Like I work, I go home, I really don't do much else. I mean, that's not uncommon. There are a lot of people who live that lifestyle, and they're perfectly okay with it.
True. Yeah.
And then there's another faction of people who wish that they had more interesting stories to tell. But if you're not ready to tell your personal stories, and everybody has them, it's just sometimes you have to kind of tease them out and figure out what is special about you. But let's say I'm not there yet. So if you ask me, hey, so do you have any fun plans for the summer? Instead of admitting or saying, hey, no, not really. I'm kind of a homebody and I'm pretty boring, or whatever's inside your head that you think about yourself, you can say, oh, that's a really great question, but let me ask that question of you first. what are your big plans for the summer? And I guarantee you 90% of the time, they're going to go off on what their plans are, and you'll never even have to go back to you. And you can keep that going with a line of follow-up questions and asking them questions about themselves. And that'll get you out of a lot of discomfort in a social situation.
I kind of like the idea, but I think you have to be careful not to be rude, because sometimes if you answer too many questions with a question, it could also be a little bit confusing that perhaps you're just trying to block conversation too. So I think you have to be careful how you use it. But I do like the idea of deflecting.
Yeah.
Or changing the topic even.
Yes. Or it can open the door to changing the topic to something that's a little more
comfortable for you.
Yeah. Something more basic, something that doesn't feel so personal.
Yeah. And I also wanted to say, too, when you go to an event, and I know for myself, I have to go to these sometimes work events I don't really like to go to because I don't socialize with a lot of people that I work with, although they're great. I love them. I will try to get there early so I can get a good seat and then let people come sit next to me so I don't have to be walking into the center of the room when people have started their conversations, and that definitely makes it easier for me.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, lots of good ideas about how to get around certain things and to feel more comfortable. And I think rehearsal is a good strategy.
Yes.
Like, think about the questions that you think you're going to get asked.
I like that. Yes.
And have some pat answers that you can pull out of a hat really quickly. I gave this suggestion to someone a while back, and who does struggle with some social anxiety and isn't even in the realm of being ready to openly socialize. But regardless, some of the things that were brainstormed included, like, okay, so in this instance, it is somebody that didn't think that they had a lot going on. And so I made suggestions like, say, well, you do some creative writing. And so you could say, oh, in my spare time, I like to write stories. And people would be very interested in that.
Yes.
Now, this person wasn't ready to share something that personal, but most people, would have something that they're willing to share.
Yes.
There was a summer where they were building a garden for the first time and going through that experience for the first time. So it wasn't the best experience that summer. The weather didn't cooperate and the plants didn't grow as expected. But in the beginning parts, hey, I started a garden, or, I have a cat and I have an aquarium and it's pretty, extensive. I mean, little things that you wouldn't even think about that make you interesting.
Right.
That you don't even consider because they're things you do just you and yourself on your own.
Yes.
But they make you an interesting person.
Absolutely, because it's something different from what somebody else does. So.
Yeah. And I mean, I am drawn to creative people. And I love to hear those stories when they're willing. And this particular person writes a lot of science fiction and then also writes stories that relate to their difficult past. And they're very moving and very emotional. And it's not a story that this person is willing to share openly, but has shared bits and pieces with me. So I feel very honored and privileged to be a part of that journey. And the writing is amazing. I mean, it's like novel, publishable ready. It's crazy good. Right now we're going through little bits and pieces from a sci-fi story that they're writing, and it's pretty cool. But those kinds of things, there's something that you do that is interesting to someone else. And so you just kind of have to find it. And when you don't have big plans, maybe you struggle financially and you're still digging your way out of college debt, or you just bought a house and you have to be careful, then you could say, well, I'm fixing up the house. I was thinking about repainting. I was, I'm doing some DIY stuff. I mean, all of those things are good, like catch-alls that don't have to be necessarily exciting and special. But, I mean, nobody wants to hear you go into a 20-minute diatribe about every little thing that you have planned this summer. They just
What? Excuse me.
But you know what I'm saying?
Yes, no,
They
I
just
agree.
are asking to make polite conversation.
Absolutely. Yes.
They only need 10 seconds
Yeah.
of answer. It doesn't have to be a lot, but you can think about like things to offer up or
Yes.
say, hey, so what do you do? Or maybe it'll give you some inspiration.
Yes. I like the idea of having a script. That's a really good idea.
Yeah. So another thing about social anxiety is a fear that if you get too deep into a social situation, somebody's going to uncover something about you that you really don't want them to know. I've had some conversations with some people in the past where they're like, ooh, I steer clear of social situations for the most part, because, I had a lot of stuff in my past that I just would rather not expose myself to, and I don't really want people to know where I came from.
Because of fear of judgment.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And I mean, do you think that people are that judgy? I mean, you see your catty, gossipy people.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always that risk, and there are always those people who will not be. I mean, you're going to come across people who are just not kind, or they're just not good humans.
And I think that there's always going to be a group of people in every situation that are going to judge you, no matter how perfect or imperfect you are. It makes no difference. But I also think that giving people the opportunity to know who you are is going to make you more transparent, and you're going to find the group that really likes you for you. And it's easier said than done, because it doesn't matter. I mean, I think there's always someone that likes a certain person because of who they are, because of what they've done. And then there are other people that no matter how great they are and how successful and, let's say, pseudo-confident, they're never going to make a connection with a certain person because it's just not going to happen. And I think we have to get over, we talked about that earlier today, we have to get over this feeling that, if somebody doesn't want to talk to us or cancels some date with us or plans, that there's something wrong with us. And that's partly a maturity thing.
Right.
And life experience part, and realizing that, things just happen and it has nothing to do with us. Taking ourselves out of that situation, I think, is very difficult, because we always want to think it's about us. We did something. And, we're human, and we, feel that way. So I think that's a big piece too, to realize that it has nothing to do with us. So.
Right. Not taking it personally.
Yes.
Yeah, we did have that conversation earlier, didn't we? And part of it, I think the way that I deal with it is just to be grateful for the time that I do get with some individuals. Now, am I as close to those individuals as I am with my real super close friends? No. But it doesn't make those people any less enjoyable to be around when they are around.
Yes.
It's just not going to be somebody that I can rely upon in my life.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's kind of like a social friend. And so, yeah. So riddle me this. I don't know if you'll have any good ideas about this, but what about people who have self-isolated, for lack of a better term, for a long time, and now it's almost like an unmovable barrier, because you've been alone for so long, you kind of forget, or maybe you even didn't have a lot of opportunities in your youth, or maybe your upbringing was so challenging. You didn't have freedom of voice as a teenager, or as in your formative years.
Right.
How do you get around overcoming a barrier where you feel like you've put yourself out there, but no one else that you've come into contact has? What if you're just unfortunate enough that nobody has ever put their hand out and said, hey? Because it is hard to always be looking for someone else to make the first move. And sometimes it requires you to make the first move. But boy, if you've had constant struggles all your life, I can see how hard it would be to take that chance to be the one to make the first move.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think partially it has to do with motivation. How motivated are you to get out of that situation? Do you have some kind of a hobby or favorite thing you do that you can share with someone or share with a group? Or do you have some expert knowledge on something? Like when I moved to this area, one of the things that I did was join a tennis club, because that's I'm pretty good at tennis, and I knew I could meet people playing tennis, and it worked out really well. So I think that would be something to think about. What can you do that or something you have that's different? Maybe it's not expert, level, but something that's different that you can find a connection with other people through that with. So I think that would be one thing to look at.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. I like that a lot. So I think it's hard. I still am kind of like thinking about that same thing. So I think about the people in my life who lately has shown an active interest in me. And how does that make me feel when someone like takes the time? Like today at work, I know that one of my coworkers has been going through a rough time. They suffered a miscarriage. It was really sad. And I lead a pretty busy work life. And so, I lost sight of it for a day, but I made a moment today to reach out. And unfortunately, it was only in an IM. It wasn't voice to voice, which I felt like that was a bit of a cop out, but everybody knows that I have nothing but meetings on my calendar. But it made a difference. And I got the answer that I was hoping for, that things were a little bit better. And
Oh, that's so nice of you to do that, though, because
yeah, but
it takes a moment for you to actually think about it and do it. I mean, it takes time that you were so consciously thinking about this person.
Well, yeah, I knew they were going through a rough time, but
Mhm.
what I want to challenge everybody who's out here listening to do is to take that moment. Who around you are you either making an assumption about and ignoring because they're quiet or shy or just don't seem interested? Because most people are not disinterested, but they may be a little discouraged or a lot discouraged, and they may not feel comfortable making first moves. So all of you extroverts out there who are social butterflies, need to find those leopards out there that don't even have the social adjective in front of their name. And I bet we will all find one or more people in our lives. That the story I just shared just kind of like triggered this thought inside my brain. That person is super social and awesome, but it still made a difference. And I think that acknowledgement and that moment of caring meant a lot in that moment because, oh yeah, you did realize, even though you're super busy and didn't have time for me 2 days ago, you do care and
Yeah.
you did take that moment.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that to puff myself up. I'm just saying how many of us actually seek out those moments?
I think it's so hard to do that. And I think there's a fear that if you get involved or you start that conversation that they're going to ask you to do something that you might not be able to do. And I think a lot of people shy away from reaching out because they're afraid of what consequence is that going to cause. And I think there have been situations where I have, offered to help certain people, and sometimes it ended up being more than what I could deliver. So I think you have to be, I think there is that fear in people's minds. So, I mean, as much as you want to be supportive, you have to be careful. The IM was a good idea. No, I mean, it would be fine to call and say, do you need something? But you know what I'm saying?
Right. And I don't want to seem insincere because this person lives 60 miles away from me. So I can't say, oh, you want me to bring you chicken soup?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but I did want to show them that I was thinking about them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds really like I'm being bitchy saying that, but I do think that sometimes, people, you just have to be careful that truly being kind and saying something and trying to be supportive is great, but you also can't make it so that that person's going to take advantage of you, And I think when someone's got social issues, I think that's really the scariest piece. It's I'm going to reach out to someone and they're going to be misperceiving what I said or rejecting me or expecting something from me that I can't give them, and then I'm going to feel worse. So I do think that there's
social anxiety about being social with someone who's socially anxious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And just being socially awkward doesn't necessarily mean that's an issue. It's just, I think we discount people when they're quiet.
Yes.
or we label them.
Yes. I think the judgment for the quiet people is huge. And I think I've been guilty of that too in the past. And then I've gotten to know someone and then realized, oh my gosh, they're just shy, or they don't know what to do, or maybe they just don't get out that much. Maybe they're new, or, and even, it's funny. We were talking, my husband and I were talking last weekend, and it was very interesting what he said to me. And I didn't think about it. He's a pretty social person. But he somehow is also, he's very much from this area and just hasn't traveled that much outside. His whole connections are here. And we were going out with a friend of mine. She's a coworker, but a friend. Just we randomly became friends over like 10 years. We don't work together still, but we still keep in touch. And her husband is from the part of the area of the country where I grew up. And so the two of us have this big connection. And my husband was just kind of uncomfortable. Like he said, I'd like to be friends with him, but I can't relate to all the stuff that you did. I said, but you can also change the topic and, talk about something else. And so when I offered for us to get together again with him, he said, well, I don't really think I want to go because I don't have anything in common. So I just thought it was interesting, which it's not really social anxiety, but it's like, he didn't feel like he could find a topic to talk about, and he didn't want to interrupt our conversation. But I thought you could have asked some questions about, what we were talking about too. So it was really interesting. I'd never thought that about him because he's pretty, he pretty much gets along with everyone. So
yeah. That's what I've experienced.
So, there you go, all the facets of social situations.
Yeah. I mean, we've kind of geared off of social anxiety specifically, but it just it morphs into, there's so many aspects.
There really is. And, people who you think can talk to anyone or have confidence sometimes are just like, well, I just can't be in this situation, so it's so different because I think everyone has some social awkwardness about them with regard to something, but we might not ever see it. But I feel like we all do. Like there are situations maybe we would never want to be in. Maybe would someone say, oh, you want to do this? I'll do it because my friend's there, but I'm not going to go by myself because it's a new situation. Yeah. Or, for example, I'm on this one board and there's we're going to be meeting with this lady who is like a wife of one of the presidents of this university here. And I have never met her. And, it's kind of a little intimidating. She's the university president's wife, so, there's a lot of, I feel like, expectations. And there's a small group that got invited because of this board. And so I told one of my friends who's been there before, I was like, could you please go with me? She's like, well, you've never been to that neighborhood. I said, no, I've just never met this lady and I just don't want to go by myself. I can, but it's much better for her to go with me. So yeah, but, so there you go. That's my social.
You had your moment of social anxiety.
I did, yes.
True confessions today.
True confessions.
On Social Leopards.
Yes.
So, let me see. I had actually taken down some notes here. Let me take a look here. So, we talked about how we can take a moment and recognize those who may benefit from a little bit of social interaction with some caution, but you also don't want to push the person if they're truly just painfully shy and don't want to socialize just because they just don't want to. We don't want to push them and make them like angry, uncomfortable.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it is an easy go-to to, as opposed to just making chatter all about the other person, that is an easy go-to if you're not used to socializing, or if you do get anxious in social situations. But seeking out someone and then having kind of an out, maybe.
Yes.
If things get uncomfortable.
Yes.
While you're starting to get used to being in social situations might be another coping strategy is, unfortunately, I have to get back to work in about 10 minutes.
Giving yourself a limit. Mm-hmm. That's a great idea.
Or,
yeah. Or like you said, a reason, but basically limiting the time.
Yeah. I've got a dog at home who's been cooped up in the cage since 7 a.m. So I've got to get running, but thank you. It's been a lovely evening.
Yes, I have another meeting. So sorry.
Yes. We could come up with a bunch, I'm sure.
Got to get back to jail now. They just let me out for an hour.
I haven't eaten in 17 hours, and I don't like any of the food that you guys are offering.
Oh, food allergies, too.
Yeah. Oh, food allergies.
Food allergies. There's nothing here I can eat. Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
Now we're just getting silly. But And another thing that I just want to kind of encourage is the just keep trying
Yes.
piece,
Yes.
because eventually you will find someone that vibes with you. Another story to share is that, among our social group that you and I met, I mean, you were not the first person I
Oh
targeted
my
for
God, you tried.
friendship.
Do, 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 do.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, I didn't envision or picture myself becoming really, really close friends with you at first. And I mean, we've talked about it a little bit, but I just felt like I was kind of, I don't know, not in your league. And I mean, that's all inside my head, right? I mean, I'm an executive, so
You are.
know.
You are. I don't think I'm
But
in your league, actually.
but I don't know, just we do, whether we want to or not. Everyone makes snap judgments about everybody all the time.
Yes, absolutely.
Right, wrong, or otherwise.
Yep.
And I have made, especially with you, I made a snap judgment that I didn't think we would become close friends. But it didn't stop me from talking to you, and it didn't stop me from continuing to interact with you socially. And then I started to adjust my thinking over time because you were so awesome. And
it's like you are too.
Oh, it's the Mutual Admiration Society here at Social Leopards today. But honestly, when we stick to our snap judgments, then we are denying ourselves. And one of those snap judgments is I can't.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, I agree with that.
Or this didn't go well one time, so it's never, ever, ever going to work out. So those kinds of things are dangerous paths to follow, because if you only have yourself to justify, then it's very easy to justify every situation.
Yes.
And we know scientifically that the longer we are socially isolated, the more dangerous our brain is, because it starts to create a wall that is hard to break down of objections that cannot be overruled because you only have yourself to argue with.
That's correct. Yeah.
And then you become what is called rigid, and you are unable to be flexible in your thinking over the course of time. That's scientifically proven, people. I don't have any quotes of references, but I know if you go out there on the internet, you
can find that. That's true.
And I've read several articles on this, that it is really a dangerous place to go, because the more socially isolated you are, the more difficult it is to impact change in your life. You really have to go after it, and you really have to want it in order to make these changes. I've talked with people who are like, I've tried everything under the sun and nothing works, and I just give up and blah, 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 blah. And to them, I say, but you're talking to me right now.
Right.
And I'm accepting you, warts and all, or, I don't see you as a horrible person. I see you as a wonderful, capable person. And I appreciate things about you. And so, I mean, I always take those moments to affirm, right? Because that's how I'm built. And it isn't always helpful, but I always want to try to find something positive to say when I understand that somebody's kind of beating up on themselves for whatever reason. And I see a lot of that out there in the world, people who are just not confident and just not comfortable in their own skin. And I think what it comes down to is vulnerability, the ability to be vulnerable with yourself and accept yourself just the way that you got built. If someone else is responsible for how you are today because you had a terrible abusive childhood, or you weren't afforded opportunities, there are just as many success stories about how people have overcome that. And I'm not saying that your struggle isn't real, and I'm not saying that it feels like it can be overcome, but there are people out there who are willing to walk beside you on that journey. Now, finding them is very risky inside your brain, and it's very, very difficult to consider that is a possibility and a probability if you take the steps to do it. If you really, really struggle deeply and feel like you are truly isolated, then, a professional therapist is probably your best bet.
I agree. Yes.
And I mean, I say that seriously. And I've heard many, many, many arguments against therapy. I can read it in a self-help book. I can do this, I can do that, I can do the other thing. But if you haven't tried it, then you can't really knock it.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're at the point where you're really struggling and you can't really engage in life and you're isolating yourself in your own home and almost developing or building a prison around yourself, then you do really need to seek out some therapy.
Yeah.
Severity, if it's impacting your ability to engage in life,
Mm-hmm.
then yes, I think that would
And
be the choice.
I've been challenged against that, giving that advice to very few people in my life that have been to that degree. But I do know somebody who's currently in that situation, and they're just adamant that there's nothing that person could do for them. That what is a therapist going to do for me that I can't? Because you're only therapying with you're therapizing. I don't know what word can I make up.
Yeah, sure.
You're only conducting therapy with yourself.
You're doing individual therapy with yourself. Yes.
Yes, and you cannot objectively see things about yourself when a third party objective observer hears you, like really hears you, really listens to you. They're going to help you see things that you did not realize about yourself. And I don't know how to make that point other than saying that, but it's very easy to make that excuse, and it's very easy to believe that excuse. If you've read 15, 20, 30 or more self-help books and they haven't helped you, well, it's because your perspective is so limited now that you aren't able to think outside the box or take those steps on your own.
Right. And you can always find evidence for something negative or for something positive if you look hard enough. So,
yeah. Well, I tell this particular individual that they're awesome every time I talk to them. And I find interesting, great things about them every time I interact with them. But it's just so hard to watch because I've never seen someone struggle with social anxiety to that extent before. And it's just, I wish I could just shake them and say,
stop.
And it's an odd little relationship because it's only an online thing. I'm not dating them. I'm just talking to them platonically, people. I am happily married. But there's a certain website. It's called 7cups.com, 7 cups of tea. There's a Japanese story that goes along with it about tea. And
wow.
it's just a website where you can get actual online therapy through that site. And I'm not selling it. I'm not getting paid to talk about it, but there are volunteers that can go on and just listen to people talk. And I have developed several close relationships virtually, anonymously with people. And I wouldn't be able to tell you a single thing about, who this person is in real life. But I can tell you that I've been talking to them for so many years that I know it's not just some act. I've had some people who I think they're just playing games on there, or I don't know even sometimes what their motivation is, but you can tell the genuine people who need to talk to somebody from those who don't. And it's a very interesting experience, and I have grown immensely from interacting with those individuals. So anyway, I think the last thing, so, we usually do like a share of the day when we have an episode. So I think I kind of spoiler alerted it at the beginning. We would love to hear stories of struggle and stories of success overcoming social anxiety that we could potentially follow up on in a future episode. And if you do have a unique struggle, we'd like to hear about it and kind of gnaw on it a little bit and see if we can get some open feedback from our audience to help you through that, or just walk alongside of you while you're going through it. We appreciate you listening to us gab on and on and on and on. And, when you're dating, there's an old saying about, you got to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince,
That's
right?
true, yep.
Very old fashioned.
Yes, I remember that one.
Yeah. Well, the same thing kind of applies, right?
For friends, yeah.
That finding someone who gets you at your core level isn't an everyday occurrence. You are not going to develop a whole bunch of deep emotional emotional relationships or equal relationships
Right.
with people in your life. There's always going to be the pros and the cons in every relationship that you ever have, except for ours.
Yes, exactly. It's
Yes.
separate. That's a separate thing.
Because we've got a pretty solid relationship. It's kind of like marriages. Friendships are like marriages, You're going to have your disagreements.
Without the sex, though.
Oh, yeah, that too. Yeah, it's platonic. But we just have to remember that there's ups and there's downs and there's differences of opinion, and we've got to respect each other.
And mood issues sometimes with me. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
I'm working on myself.
You have a bad day at work. You have a bad, incident with your spouse. Sometimes you just got to vent.
That's right.
Yep. All of those things happen. And finding somebody who can just accept you at your core level, no matter what's happening, is like special. And that's when you have a close friend. But
I agree with all that.
we have digressed a lot during this episode.
It's all good, though.
Yeah. So we hope to hear from you. We want to do a deeper dive on social anxiety and all of the different strategies that people have out there to get out there even when you're not feeling it. And I know that, like, when I was experiencing grief after the passing of my parents, my dad passed away first, and that was really, really difficult. And I talked about that in a previous episode. My mom passed away recently, and I kind of forced myself to follow a different path that time because I could have very easily gone right back down the rabbit hole, but I didn't. And I forced myself to socialize sooner. And you know what? Even while she was like not doing well, there were a couple of times, including one very fun basement karaoke session at your house.
I'm so glad.
Where I forced myself into a social situation when I was not feeling it, but I gave my all to it. And once I got there, I let go, and it uplifted me. And I felt so much better afterwards that it was worth it.
Oh, I'm so glad. And you have such a beautiful voice. So.
So just remember that, sometimes there are hidden gems too when you do take that risk. And we hope that you find a way to take that risk. And we hope that we can help you find, or you can help you find, actually, we're just throwing ideas into the wind here, ways to find that moment of peace amid that anxiety or that fear or that nervousness or whatever you want to call it that's preventing you from doing something, and taking that one step. And like we kind of mentioned, have an out. So if it gets to be too much, you have some sort of an excuse to skedaddle earlier than expected. But hope for the best, and hope that you just blend into the crowd and that you have a good time and that everything works out. Because 9 times out of 10, whatever we believe is our worst case scenario is what we're focused on, right?
And it's usually a lot worse in our head than it is in reality.
Exactly.
We make things worse than they actually are, and sometimes better than they are.
Yeah. Oh, and that's a story I kind of forgot about it, and my daughter will kill me, but I have a daughter, and she has struggled a little bit with anxiety over the years. And when she was younger, she doesn't do this now. I think she's overcome most of this, but she would call me, and literally all I could hear was, and I'm like, babe, breathe, little girl, breathe. And this is in her 20s. And she could barely get out what she was upset about. And it was always some crazy what if that was never going to happen in a million years. But that was what she was focused on in the moment. And she couldn't get away from it. And you had to talk her down off the ledge. And you had to remind her, okay, so this has happened before. And did your worst thought come to fruition? No. It's going to be okay. And sometimes you have to have that talk with yourself. Sometimes you might have to call somebody in your life and help them help you off the ledge so that you can think clearly. But when anxiety does have a hold, it is strong.
It is,
and
yes.
It feels real.
Yep.
But I don't know how many of you guys are Christian music listeners, but there was, I bring this up every once in a while. Oh, and I can't remember the name of the guy that sings it. I'll have to come back and do a disclaimer later, but there's a song and it's called Fear He Is a Liar. And oh my gosh, the words to that song are so awesome because it reminds you that fear is the one talking the loudest. And what is fear? It's an emotion. It's not a physical thing. It can't harm you. It is just talking you into things or not doing things.
Remember Martin Luther's quote? The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Exactly.
So, yes.
Very deep.
I know.
Yeah.
Sometimes they can be deep.
But, I mean, really give that some thought too. You know, the feelings are so much stronger than the reality in most cases. You know, if you are living in a situation where there are actual things happening that are harmful to you, that's like a different story altogether.
That's reality, yeah.
That's reality. But when you're just thinking the worst and you've never actually, like, you got to stop yourself and you got to say, wait a minute, has this actually ever happened in my life? Or have I ever actually seen anybody, like, get publicly shamed during one of these social events?
During the witch hunts, they did that, but I think that was in the 5th century, 15th century.
Something. It was a long time ago.
That's a different podcast.
And in high school, things are different, right? So if you're young and you're still in that high school/college scene, I mean, you know, the frontal lobe doesn't develop for a while.
Until the age of 24, actually. But that's why we should not make any significant decisions until the age of 25.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, we never follow our own advice.
No, we didn't. Neither of us did. But, you know, that is a valid point that, you know, when you use your childhood and young adult past to justify not the word no, or I can't, or I won't, you know, once you mature beyond that and you're in your 30s or your 40s or your 50s or your 60s or however old you are listening here today, just remember that, you know, it's a new day. People have been through so many more life experiences in most cases, unless you're just a dweeb. You have matured and...
Define that word. No,
dweeb? Just, I hate the word idiot, but that's the closest I can come. You know, I mean, there are always going to be there's always going to be somebody who just never grows up, but the vast majority of people grow up after the age of 25 and they have more tolerance. And, you know, now even in the workplace, we are very keen about diversity, equity, and inclusion, equality, all of those buzzwords, equitable, you know, inclusion. That's the word I was trying to come up with.
Inclusive. You're very inclusive.
Being inclusive.
Yes.
Not judging people for having green hair or having a nose ring or whatever it is. And I mean, tattoos are like in the 80s and the 90s, if you had a tattoo, it was like, whoa. Yeah. Now everybody has a tattoo.
It's true.
So it's, you know, different things are the norm now than they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So however old you are, when you look at the passage of time and how things have changed, you know, I think like the next generation is going to be set up pretty well because, you know,
they've seen everything.
Well, but what was taboo and you couldn't even talk about when we were kids and never came up is now openly conversed about today. Yeah. So that diversity, equity, and inclusion part is going to be embedded in the younger generation's lifestyles to a new degree in many parts of the United States. Not all, but some. And I'm not a terribly, terribly liberal person, but I do not want somebody, I don't care if somebody has a moral or religious objection to how somebody lives their life. That's for them to think quietly on their own. And how you want to live your life is how you want to live your life. And it doesn't matter whether Joe Blow accepts it or not. That's how you're living your life, and that should be okay. And nobody should, like, be the wiser for it.
So as long as you're happy and you're not hurting anyone, not hurting yourself, I think that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you can't if you can't get with the program and just be accepting of others who are whoever they are, then you just haven't matured.
I agree.
So you don't have to agree with, I mean, you're agreeing, but I don't mean it that way.
I know.
I mean, you don't have to agree with somebody's choice.
That's right.
You can still respect them.
That's right. I mean, you have to separate that. You meet somebody and they might make choices or have a lifestyle that's different than yours. But if they're a good person, you have a connection, that's got to be a separate thing.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, and why there doesn't have to be any judgment to it.
Right.
Just because there's a disagreement between, like, I would never do that. Okay, so, so don't do it.
Exactly.
But,
yeah.
It doesn't make that person less than. Just because they don't do the exact same things you do.
What?
I know, right? What a concept.
It is so radical.
I enjoy seeing people with, different hairstyles, different body styles, and being like comfortable in their own skin.
Yeah, that is really amazing that they can be, because I don't think I could do that. So I would not be comfortable with different hair colors and other things because I'm just too conservative. And so, but that's okay. I was raised like that. So that's my handicap. But I do really admire people that can just be themselves completely like that, if that's what they like and they don't care.
You're not judging them for making their own choices. No. You're accepting them for the choices that they made.
Exactly.
Or the way that they just are.
Exactly.
I mean, sometimes, I don't even want to make it about choices. I just want to, you are who you are, and that's who you are. And that's okay with me.
Yeah, exactly.
And,
but that takes an enormous, I think, amount of confidence to just be able to be completely yourself. I think we all just probably struggle a little bit with that, but yes.
Yeah. And I think the reason for that, them bringing that up at the end of this episode, is that, I think that our inability to accept ourselves in that same way that I don't know how much of the population I represent as being pretty like open and not being judgmental to the best of my ability. I mean, we're all victims of our past, and we have to learn our lessons the hard way sometimes. But I'm always actively seeking to be completely non-judgmental.
Yeah, it's yes, same. Okay. And I also think I'm also actively seeking to realize that life is short.
Mm-hmm.
Tomorrow there could be a radical change in our lives. Each moment, each day is precious. Trying to be kind as much as I can be, even though sometimes there are bitches that really trigger me, but I try not to be mean to them. But just remember that they could get cancer tomorrow, and I'd feel really guilty if I said something mean to them. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to walk away and not doing it. So
that's right. And, that's just kind of the message. And if everyone in the world, I'd like to teach the world. I don't know. I'm aging myself. Showing my age. Not good.
Stop it.
I know. But if we all were open to just accepting others, I think it would go a long way to helping others accept themselves. And I'm not saying that we can like save the world or change the world or anything like that, because we can't.
We are the world.
There you go.
We are the people.
But what I'm trying to say is, when somebody is, you might be a light for someone at some point, and allow them to take that next step towards accepting themselves. And it's probably not going to make a big difference, but if everyone does their best to be that way, then it kind of helps. So I don't know. I'm beating a
dead horse.
I don't know. Beating a drum that doesn't need to be beaten anymore. That's how I was going to go. I wasn't going to go with the dead horse. That makes me sad to think about a dead horse.
I don't even know where that came from.
But I don't know. It's another old person phrase.
Yeah. I gotta stop it.
All right. I think we are done with this episode, aren't we?
I think so, yeah.
I think we've said everything there is to say.
We've covered a lot.
We have.
That's awesome.
And we went on and on today. This might be our longest episode yet.
Yes.
I know we have gone on and on, but before we depart, we need to do our sharing moment of the week. So this week, our question is, of course, about social anxiety. So if you have a story to tell about social anxiety, especially if it includes ways that you were able to overcome it. We would be very excited to hear from you. You can reach us in 2 ways. You can send us an email, and that is share@socialleopards.com, or you can visit our website at socialleopards.com. We appreciate everyone out here listening
Thank you for
to us.
listening and supporting us.
Absolutely. And we hope to hear from you soon. Have a great rest of your day, evening, morning, week, weekend, whenever you're listening to us. Have a safe car ride. Get that house cleaned, whatever it is. See you, Social Leopards. Till next time.
This podcast sometimes discusses the struggles of loneliness, isolation, and depression in a way that can be triggering. Our content is not intended to provide or replace professional counseling. If life starts to feel too hard to bear, please seek help. In the United States, dial 988 if you feel as if you may harm yourself or others. Help is a phone call away. If you can't afford or find therapy, dial 211 for no or low-cost resources that may be available near you.